For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Thabi Madiba, researcher and analyst. Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss DA Alliance politics in 2019. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Were you developing a thesis in your article to the effect that the DA is not able to hold coalitions together?
Well, I didn't set out to prove that. I was trying to understand what was going on in Nelson Mandela Bay within the context of the whole question of what the possibilities were with the DA forming these coalition governments after last year's local government elections. A lot of people saw those results as pointing to the possibility of the ANC losing national power in 2019. And that was dependent on the coalitions that they formed, holding and being functional in local government, because local government is easier than national government. And it did seem quite difficult in a way, because you're bringing together a whole lot of parties. Sometimes you need just one vote from ACDP or something like that. And all of these partners had to be held together. And what I tried to do in the article is to, first of all, argue that coalition governments are very fragile. They're very hard to hold together. People say that you are more likely to get coalition governments when you have proportional representation, as we have here. But the reason why we have coalition government now is not because of proportional representation, but because the scandals surrounding the president led to a loss of votes on the side of the ANC. Now, the DA, as the strongest partner in a coalition government, has to find a way of managing the coalition so that the other partners do not feel that they're throwing their weight around as the strongest partner. The leader of the coalition, or the major party in the coalition, the DA, has to bend over backwards to satisfy other parties, because even if the other parties are unreasonable, the largest party can't afford to have them break away because they need their vote. So that there's an uneven level of compromise that I think is needed, although all the parties to the coalition want to keep the ANC out of power. So they've all got a common interest in holding, having the coalition survive. But in the case of the DA, people want to be the national government in 2019, and they want to show that they can deliver better than the ANC. They want to show that when DA rules, it's efficient, that the roads are looked after, that the robots work, and all these sorts of things. They want to show they can do these things, and they can't do this if they're busy fighting with their coalition partners. Now, the record of the DA is uneven in the sense that even Cape Town, which is the showcase, many people complain that it is uneven in the way in which the goods of government are distributed, the way in which areas are looked after, things like that. In Johannesburg, you have Mashaba is a little bit of an unguided missile in some ways, in the sense that he wants buildings condemned, but he doesn't follow the law in terms of providing alternative accommodation. He's attacked human rights lawyers because of the collapse of the buildings and people being killed and so forth, and he's blamed them for this. But what the human rights lawyers have been arguing is in line with constitutional court decisions, that you can't evict people unless you have alternative accommodation. Now, the Nelson Mandela Bay situation, I don't know details about Msimanga, and I also, as I said, I haven't studied Johannesburg fully, but I've got very information on Nelson Mandela Bay. I actually sent a message to Athol Trollop, the executive mayor, and his chief of staff responded to me and said he would answer my questions by Monday, 12 noon at latest, and I never got an answer. And when my article appeared and there was some debate on Twitter, Trollop said that I and other people know nothing about what's going on in Nelson Mandela Bay. Now, what has been happening in Nelson Mandela Bay, and I try to find out, and if I've got it wrong, Trollop's office is partly to blame. But what I got, the information I got, points to an ongoing conflict between the former deputy mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, Bobani from the UDM, who was recently removed, and it is claimed by the DA that the two UDM representatives have repeatedly voted against the coalition, and it is alleged that Bobani has been involved in a lot of irregularities and so forth and so on. Now, what I got from reading the Herald, I got a lot of material from the Herald in Port Elizabeth, is that, first of all, it is not clear on what issues the UDM voted against the coalition. It may be that it's part of the agreement and that they are in breach of the agreement by voting against the coalition. And if that is the case, it's incompatible with UDM being a member of a coalition if they're voting against it. But I wasn't clear, and I didn't get answers as to whether this is part of the agreement, because these may have been minor issues where it was a question of choice. Also, it doesn't appear that Trollop consults widely with members of the coalition. The UDM complains that they never saw his State of the Metro speech before he delivered it, and he says he's got no obligation to show them the speech. They are confusing, he says, who is the dog and who is the tail, and they are the tail, he says. And he's not, consulting, and he brought in, without consulting with his alliance partners, he brought in the Patriotic Alliance, as it's called, formed by Gayton McKenzie and formerly Kenny Kunene. Kunene left them, and their representative played a key role. He proposed the motion for the removal of Bobani as deputy mayor, and he now wants that position, and he also wants to be deputy mayor. I mean, he wants to be head of safety and security. Now, I wonder what the average DA member or member of the public feels about an alliance between the DA, which sets itself up as rule of law and all this, and a slightly shady organization as a basis for increasing the weight behind the DA alliance. There's also the question of, and also that this is a deal between the DA and the Patriotic Alliance, not the rest of the partners to the coalition. It's a way of doing things which undermines an agreement. Other thing that's very important is that the vote, to have a vote to remove the deputy mayor, you need 61 people present. Now, there were 60 people present. Others were staging a walkout. And the speaker claimed that the extra numbers were gained by counting people who were in the chamber but were busy walking out. And that is extremely irregular. And for an organization like the DA, which claims that it's so constitutionalist, it is quite a blot on their record to do something like that. So my sense is that this is quite a problematic thing for the DA, and it can have implications for the future.
But is it not too soon to draw a conclusion for 2019?
No, it is too soon, but I think the EFF, who are not part of the coalition, but they give their qualified support, has said they're withdrawing support there, and they're withdrawing support everywhere else where there's a DA-led coalition. So it's going to destabilize Tshwane and Johannesburg, and I think it's not a very wise way of conducting coalition politics, because the national DA does not appear to have distanced itself from anything that happened in Nelson Mandela Bay, and purely from the point of view of negotiating a continuing relationship between the DA as the strongest party and the rest, I don't think the DA is handling it in a sufficiently flexible way, in a sufficiently constructive and sophisticated way. Now, it may well be that they have done their best to convince Bantu Holomisa and all this sort of thing, but then why, if they are in the right, why then do they conduct voting for removing Bobani in such a shady way? Why do they bring in the Patriotic Alliance? And why do they risk everything? Is there no way they could have avoided this one way or another? So I don't know what it means for the future, but what I think it does suggest to the public, that if the DA can't manage a coalition at a local government level, it may have much more difficulty at a national level. Also, the ANC could well still, the 2 years to go, the ANC could still itself form a coalition. It'll be the strongest party with over 40% for sure, and no other party is going to get something like that. And it's easier then for it, in terms of numbers, to form a coalition if, say, the EFF can be persuaded. ANC would then have to make concessions to the EFF, but that's also a possibility. So I don't think it's too soon to say that there are danger signs for the DA, whereas a year ago everything was looking great. Now I think there are danger signs.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about DA Alliance Politics in 2019.